Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jim Rooney. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you all to today's Government Affairs Forum. This is a series that allows us to feature prominent government leaders in the Greater Boston region and beyond, and today is no exception. We're joined today by Representative Katherine Clark of the 5th Congressional District here in Massachusetts. Congresswoman Clark has dedicated her career to public service on the local, state, and national levels, and we're grateful to have Congresswoman Clark advocating on behalf of not only her district, but all of Massachusetts and our nation's capital, focusing on issues important to all of us, including childcare, advancing women in the workplace, and of course this year, COVID-19 relief and recovery. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the sponsor of our Government Affairs Forum, Bank of America, and Massachusetts President Micheal Chamberlain for their continuing support and enabling us to bring relevant content to the Greater Boston business community. A couple of housekeeping issues. Note that today's session is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page shortly after the event is completed. The forum is that Congresswoman Clark will make some comments, and then I will facilitate some Q&A. So I'd encourage you to utilize the chat and Q&A functions during today's conversation and submit your questions, and we'll do our best to get to them during the Q&A period. With that, I'm pleased to introduce today's featured speaker, Representative Katherine Clark. Representative Clark has served in Congress since 2013, as I said, representing the 5th Congressional District of Massachusetts. It's a diverse district, including 24 cities and towns that stretches in the north of Boston from Winthrop and Revere through Metro West out to Southborough, Ashland, and Holliston. Congresswoman Clark serves as Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, making her the 6th highest ranking Democrat member of the 116th Congress, a body of 435 members. She also serves as a member of the Steering and Policy Committee in the caucus. I was reading up on Katherine Clark a little bit before this session, and I came across an article in The Hill that called Congresswoman Clark the most powerful woman in Congress you've probably never heard of. In the same article, the late Congressman John Lewis was asked by the reporter, how high can she go? His answer was, she's smart, she's gifted, she can go as high as she wants. In a more recent profile, WBUR described Congresswoman Clark as a person whose first race was for the Melrose School Committee in 2004, and now she's a contender to be the Assistant Speaker of the House of Representatives in 2021. Representative Clark is a member of the U.S. House Committee on Appropriations and 3 subcommittees. She's also a proud member of several caucuses in Congress, including the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the Women's Caucus. Her career in public service is focused on many issues, including addressing the challenges that women, children, and families face, access to affordable, high-quality health care and paid family leave. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Clark, a very powerful woman in Congress that this audience certainly has heard of. The virtual floor is yours, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much, Jim, and the Boston Chamber of Commerce for having me here today. I am immensely proud to represent the 5th District of Massachusetts, and whether I'm on my Appropriations Committee, in a hearing, or at the leadership table, I am humbled to represent you, your work, and your innovation, and to know that our partnership is driving Massachusetts, the country, and the global community forward. It is this partnership and our communal drive for a better tomorrow that energizes me and gives me hope during this very difficult time. And I don't need to tell you how hard and challenging 2020 has been. The pandemic has forced us all to stop striving and focus on surviving. We mourn over 9,000 Bay Staters and 225,000 Americans. We ache for the millions affected with COVID-19, and frankly, we fear for what's to come. Whether or not you've lost a loved one or have been sick with the virus, all of us have been impacted by the uncertainty and the unraveling that has gripped our country over the last 7 months. Our health and security have been jeopardized, while normalcy for our employees, kids, and communities has been dissolved. Our economy has been rattled, with America facing the highest unemployment since the Great Depression and further growth of income and racial inequality. Our system of justice has been shaken, and the toxic roots of slavery have once again been exposed by the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many other Americans of color. And our democracy has been tested. During this pandemic, but frankly, during the last 4 years, where truth, integrity, and rule of law have been disregarded by the White House as the president has trivialized and trampled on our founding principles. It's hard to believe this, but it was only 1 year ago this month that the House was in the midst of impeachment proceedings. My intent today is not to deepen your pandemic doom, but to realize that this is the moment that can be our clarion call. While chaos and loss have challenged our nation, this moment has forced us to acknowledge where our vulnerabilities lie and has given us a blueprint to strengthen our future. The pandemic has reminded us that we are profoundly interconnected, that the strength and health of our economy relies on the health and security of all families across our community and country. And as partners, government and business, we must leverage this lesson to chart a better path forward. With everything we do, let's ask ourselves, do our policies and strategic plans for today build a more inclusive and just tomorrow, where every American has a shot at success? This is the lens through which I approach my work. And this is the metric that will give us true stability in our economy and in our nation's future. And this philosophy could not be more important than when it comes to our number one priority, crushing this virus. I know the news out of Washington can not only be disheartening, it can be maddening. But since day one of COVID-19, the House Democrats have united behind the guiding principle that a healthy economy cannot exist without healthy people. We must follow the science to reopen and recover. We hear this message over and over from our doctors and epidemiologists. We need a comprehensive testing, tracing, and treatment plan. And we've seen Massachusetts implement these strategies and with it, save lives and livelihoods. That's why House Democrats passed the HEROES Act in May, a comprehensive COVID-19 relief package that would implement a national strategic plan to tackle the virus and provide immediate relief to struggling businesses and families. But for months, the president has ignored this legislation, and Mitch McConnell has responded with a shrug of his shoulders. Mitch McConnell told us back in June to hit the pause button on the American people. And the president said, it is what it is. While dismayed by their callousness and ignorance, we continue to be in the negotiations with this administration on a relief package. and I know that you are relying on us to deliver. We need legislation that will finally place us on a path to recovery so your businesses, families, and those Americans living in the most pain are not living from one moment of chaos to the next. Testing, tracing, treatment, and a vaccine distribution plan. These are the vital objectives. This is the foundation that will enable us to tackle the economic devastation caused by this pandemic and the disparities it has unearthed and exacerbated. It's no secret that inequality has been an underlying story throughout this pandemic. We are in the midst of a long overdue national truth-telling about systemic racism and economic inequality that permeates every aspect of our lives. Unequal access to healthcare, food, affordable housing, broadband, and clean air and water have left pockets of Americans struggling to stay alive and to stay financially afloat. We are looking for solutions to so many challenges, from criminal justice reform to affordable healthcare to educational equity. So today I want to talk to you about what I see as a remedy and why this is the moment that we must finally take action. That remedy is childcare. Childcare sits at the intersection of economic, race, and gender injustice, and it's a proven resource that facilitates the growth of our overall economy. By investing in our childcare system, we have the ability to make lasting improvements that support families and their economic stability, children and their long-term success, Americans of color who disproportionately work in the childcare field and whose parents are particularly constrained by the high costs of care, and our economy, which currently loses out on tens of billions of dollars annually because of the inaccessibility of our childcare system. So let's look at some of the facts, starting with our parents. Before the pandemic, families were struggling to afford childcare. Here in Massachusetts, we are the most expensive state when it comes to infant care. For the average family, childcare costs more a month than rent or the mortgage payment. Families are spending nearly 10% of their income. That is 40% higher than the US Department of Health and Human Services definition of affordability. For single parents, childcare is a necessity, not an option, and they spend an even larger portion of their income on childcare, 36%. And for families of color, the reality is even worse. The cost of childcare is 42% of the median income of a Black family. And Black parents are almost 2 times more likely to experience hardships on their careers from lack of childcare. The cost of childcare prevents families from buying a home, reducing debt, and staying and advancing in the workforce. The pandemic has taught us that the economic instability and racial inequity jeopardizes all of our well-being. Americans living in poverty are at a greater risk of being exposed and contracting COVID-19. Additionally, analysis by the nonpartisan APM Research Lab shows that 1 in 1,000 Black Americans have already died from COVID-19. According to the CDC, the virus death toll is twice as high for Hispanic, Black, and Native American adults under the age of 65 as it is for whites. And children of color make up 75% of the coronavirus deaths of people under the age of 21. And to make matters worse, COVID-19 has pushed 8 million Americans into poverty. The pandemic has widened the gulf between the have and have-nots in our country, while also highlighting we are only as secure as the most vulnerable. A virus doesn't care what zip code you live in or how much money is in your bank account. If Woburn is a red zone, Lexington, Weston, Belmont, and the entire greater Boston area are also at risk. COVID-19 has proven that when our neighbors are sick, all of us and everything we rely on is destabilized and endangered, from grocery stores to our schools to our food supply chain. We can invest in childcare and significantly improve the financial standing of Americans of color, and our collective health. An essential piece of this equation is women who have been hit especially hard during this pandemic. 1 out of 4 women are exiting the workforce. In September, 865,000 women left the labor market. We are living through the country's first she-cession. Women have been hit harder by this recession than by previous economic downturns, in part because of the industries severely impacted: hospitality, education, retail, and childcare. Recent surveys have identified 2 major contributing factors to this purge of women from our economy: the gender pay gap and a lack of childcare. Because of pay inequality and a pesky little thing called gender stereotypes, women are predominantly the secondary breadwinners in a household, and therefore they are the first to leave the labor market when faced with the dueling challenge of caregiving and work. If childcare wasn't a disproportionate percentage of a family's budget, we wouldn't force women to have to choose between their families, their careers, and working. Then there's the childcare sector itself. In the best of times, these small businesses run on the thinnest of margins. They are predominantly owned and operated by women. 96% of childcare providers are women, and 40% of them are women of color. These women are often paid minimum wage. So while childcare costs are high, the salaries are low, leaving the women running the childcare sector largely unable to afford and find care for their own families. And then the pandemic hit. Across the United States, 60% of childcare providers were forced to close because of COVID-19. This spring, we lost 325,000 childcare jobs. Now, childcare centers are grappling with lower enrollment limits to adhere to safety standards, while at the same time incurring substantial costs for staff, cleaning supplies, and personal protective equipment. Closures of this magnitude are estimated to lead to the loss of nearly 4.5 million childcare slots, and with it, millions of early educator jobs. Without intervention, this situation will only get worse. More parents, primarily women, will leave the workforce to become full-time caregivers. And it's not just moms and workers who lose out. The importance of early education to our kids is very well documented. It is a predictor of long-term success in the classroom and in the workplace, and is proven to increase economic stability and social emotional well-being. Childcare is an essential tool when it comes to closing the educational opportunity gap that prevents minority and low-income students from achieving the same success as their white and affluent peers. With childcare, we can put more kids on the path to success and help close the persistent inequalities that prevent all students from having the same access to a bright future. Finally, Childcare is essential to our nation's short and long-term economic recovery and growth, and your bottom line. Unfortunately, we've long left this opportunity on the table. Thanks to the work of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, we know that in one state alone, before the pandemic, the lack of childcare was estimated to cost employers $3 billion annually in lost productivity, absences, and turnover rate. In 2016, an estimated 2 million parents reduced work due to childcare issues, working fewer hours, taking a pay cut, or leaving their jobs altogether. Nationally, the cost of lost earnings, productivity, and revenue due to inadequate access to childcare totals an estimated $57 billion a year. And a lack of childcare is holding our economy hostage. Meanwhile, study after study shows us that increasing diversity in our workforce, including increasing the role of women, leads to more successful people, products, and companies. In sum, investment in childcare is a win-win for all of us. Childcare is the great equalizer that will enable employees to enter, stay, and fully realize their potential in the workforce, sustain thriving small businesses in communities of color, provide all our families more economic stability, and give all of our kids a great start. So today, I'm asking for a paradigm shift. We must finally recognize that childcare is infrastructure. We need to stop thinking of childcare as a personal decision for parents and recognize it as a public good. Business and government have long shared a commitment to our public transportation system because we understand that these assets are foundational to our economy. And we must have that same universal commitment to childcare. If the Zakim Bridge collapsed, the effects on the local economy would be immediate, devastating, and obvious. Every one of us would leap into action. We would make the necessary investments and resources because we know our ability to function hinges on it. The pandemic has shown us this is true for childcare. Our country can't reopen or rebuild, and neither can we afford just to go back to status quo. I have led the House's effort to directly invest in the childcare sector, both in our federal budget as a member of the Appropriations Committee and also in response to this pandemic. Back in April, I proposed a $50 billion childcare bailout to solve the immediate challenges we face and to stabilize this industry. This successfully passed the House in July. And in collaboration with Chairman Neal, I passed the Child Care for Economic Recovery Act that would invest in our child care facilities, support increased wages for early educators, and lower costs for parents. The House has included these bills in our relief package because we are working from the premise that there can be no recovery without childcare. And I am so encouraged that we do not stand alone in this commitment. Regardless of generation or political party, Americans are recognizing this vital truth. There are daily news stories in this country about the extent of the problem and also solutions that people are offering. Businesses are stepping up because their employees are speaking out about how vital childcare is. Towns and cities are finding innovative ways to offer childcare, even with strapped budgets. And I promise, Congress is talking about this every single day. We have momentum, and I'm asking you to add your voice. I'm asking you to prioritize the needs of parents during this unique time, but also after we move past this pandemic. childcare can be a pillar of our path forward. And like so many other times in American history, we can take tragedy and transform it into opportunity. I want to end these comments with the words of inspiration from my friend, the late Congressman John Lewis, which is where we started, as Jim mentioned him in his introduction. And the last time I heard John speak was during one of our caucus calls back in June, right after the murder of George Floyd. And he was filled with deep pain over watching that video. And he said that he mourned that the soul of our country was not in better shape. But he also shared with us that watching people from all walks of life and races come forward to speak about the need for racial justice in this country had also given him the greatest optimism that he'd ever had in all his work for civil rights and as a member of Congress. And he told us not to lose our faith. So we need to follow these words. See the path forward as a path to something stronger, not to simply recover, but to revitalize and realize what is possible. And I thank you, not only for your time here today, but for your true partnership and for being part of the solution for the challenges that our country faces. We are so interconnected, and I'm going to be tapping on your many talents to come up with the solutions the American people need to secure their health and put together an even more inclusive economy. I am very grateful for your work. I'm grateful to be here with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Congresswoman Clark, for those powerful words. And as you were talking, I was reminded that, you know, this is a subject that you have spoken about, have led on for a long time. And, you know, in all honesty, many of us are just catching up to you. So thank you for that leadership. And, you know, you've made so many interesting points about the importance of childcare as indeed an element of our economic infrastructure at this point, whether it's the issues of equity and closing the wealth gap, affordability and cost, importance to the business community, and now in this moment, how the COVID crisis has affected women because of the childcare issue. You cited the almost million women who have left the workforce.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen the Massachusetts survey that says that about a half of the women in the workforce have reduced their hours due to childcare issues. And about 20% are considering leaving the workforce. So if that doesn't get it on the radar screen of the business community, I don't know what will. But if this is now a part of our economic infrastructure, yet it's kind of an industry, if you think about it as an industry, that's sprouted up like sunflowers sort of all over the place, and really hasn't achieved in our culture the status of K through 12 education as a public good. Does that mean that we need a systemic change to the existing way that childcare is thought of in this country? A wholesale rethinking of childcare?
Yes, I think that it does, and I also think you're selling the Boston Chamber a little short, because I can tell you that you were one of the first nationally to really highlight this as an economic issue and as absolutely crucial to making sure that we have recovery here in the greater Boston area and in the Commonwealth. So, and it's exactly those partnerships, because we do have to change the way we view this. We have very much viewed it through a lens of these are private decisions that parents make that really only affect a parent and a provider. And I think that if we can change that paradigm, and I am very grateful for the partnership of the Chamber in helping do this work, we will be able to show that this is a public good, and it's part of our economic infrastructure. And we have so much data that highlights the incredible difference it makes in a child's life. It really can close that achievement gap for low-income children in a profound way, and have those children reading on grade level by third grade, where we have shown that's the metric that really tells us that a child will be able to be successful, not only in school, but throughout their working lives. So we have to just connect all these pieces together. We have the data. We know this is not anecdotal. This is about how we rebuild our economy. And I know that the Chamber has been very focused also on an equity agenda and looking at addressing diversity in all the ways that that means: gender, race, and making sure that we are incorporating and meeting this moment of racial justice and incorporating that into our economic strategies. And so childcare is a great way to really meet this moment in history as we look at a predominantly women and women of color workforce with even more extreme impacts on low income and communities of color when we have lack of access to childcare. So we can come together and make sure that we are meeting this moment. And it's really going to be the work with the Chamber and with businesses that is going to make this happen and make this paradigm shift.
Great. There's the questions that are starting to pop up that mimic some of mine. So one is, and this has come up in my conversations with childcare providers and representatives of the industry. You mentioned the low margins, and now reopening is required. Some physical adjustments, to the childcare center. And expenses associated with that. So maybe a childcare question that allows us to transition into COVID relief a little bit. In the federal legislation related to relief, is there some funding for childcare that would enable the physical improvements of others related to operating in a COVID environment? And you mentioned the HEROES Act. There's couple of weeks less to election day. We all watch the news, and one day there's hope, the next day there's despair about the possibilities. I mean, what's your crystal ball say about the next relief act?
First, there is relief specifically aimed at helping childcare businesses meet this moment, whether that would be building a vestibule on the front of a family childcare home, or being able to purchase equipment that would sanitize toys, putting up walls, anything that helps them meet sort of new licensing requirements and safety standards. So that is included in our package. And people often ask me, are you optimistic that we can get to an agreement? And, with the president who's ping-ponging back and forth, I hope we can catch him on a moment where he is like, we need a big package and I'm going to force the Senate into it. That's where he was earlier in this week. But I can tell you that we are resolved. And we are going to stay at the negotiating table. We are going to continue to fight for our businesses, for our families, for people who are really on the corner of fear and despair. And these are the stories that haunt me, that I'm hearing across my district. And so we're going to continue to push. Mitch McConnell seems very happy to try and close down the Senate and just get through Election Day. But the needs of these families have not improved. The needs of our business community have not improved in the last 5 months since we passed the HEROES Act. So we are resolved, and I hope that we can still do this. We have everyone at the ready. We will get back to Washington. We will draft this and pass this in record time. But we need Mitch McConnell and the president to give us a green light and to say that they see the despair. But we're not leaving. We're not going anywhere. We're going to keep pushing.
Great. A related question from an association representing approved special education schools in the Commonwealth, educating nearly 8,000 students with severe special education needs. And the question is, we're hopeful for additional federal relief for school districts and member schools. Can you discuss any of your priorities for education funding, specifically special education, and in any future relief packages?
Yeah. So while at the same time, we took the funding that we asked for in HEROES, and in a show of good faith and compromise, we reduced it by half. But at the same time, we added in $100 billion for our schools. And the speaker has said it many times that there is no reason why our schools and our workplaces can't be the safest places, but it takes investment. We have to invest in testing. We have to invest in HVAC. We have to invest in making sure that people have protective equipment. But if we do this, we should be able to reopen our schools. And this is especially true for children with special needs and special challenges. I think we all know my youngest just graduated from high school, so I am not living this like my friends are, but it is such a difficult time for parents who have resources, who are able to work from home to help their children through remote learning. But for people with children with special challenges who during regular school pre-pandemic had many hours of one-on-one services or small group services, this has been devastating. And we have to prioritize these children. And what I'm hearing from school committee members, from superintendents and teachers around my district, and it's reflected around the Commonwealth and the country, is that these children are not just going to be maybe 7 months behind, 8 months behind, but they're going to be years behind where they need to be. So we have to do everything we can to get our schools reopened. And that's the funding that we've put in. It is very much aimed at making sure that we can deliver services as soon as we can in person to our kids who are at risk, whether they have special challenges or whether they are English as second language learners. These are the children at risk, and they're the ones who are really falling through the cracks of remote learning.
Congresswoman, we have a couple of questions. I'll combine. They're forward-looking, I think, into perhaps next year after the election and the new government gets back to work. One's on immigration, one's on transportation. You're well aware, and the Boston Chamber has advocated, given the makeup of our workforce and the importance of immigrants to our economy, particularly a lot of the white-collar, white-coat industries in research and medical technology. We depend on that workforce, and we have for centuries, literally. But there's a lot of fits and starts with respect to immigration policy that we've experienced in recent years. And the second question that is in the queue is one related to transportation infrastructure funding in particular, and whether or not is that a bipartisan issue we can unite behind finally in next year?
Yeah, well, I'll start with immigration, and you're absolutely right. We know how vital this this issue is to our businesses. And it really goes from everything from our restaurants and seasonal businesses on Cape Cod to our research labs and our C-suites. And so we have to have a comprehensive immigration reform. It is something that we have put off too long. And under this administration, we've moved backwards into chaotic, racist, divisive policies. And so it's time we come together. And I think that we need to start by looking at comprehensive reform, but really make sure that we are taking care of our dreamers. And I have met dreamers, just dozens of them, students in our most prestigious universities and at our community colleges. I've met them at our high-tech places of employment. And they are American in every way but on paper. And we have to secure their future as part of immigration reform, as well as looking at the overall how we issue visas in this country and have sound, humane immigration policy that can help us in our economic recovery. Because you're absolutely right. Immigrants are just such a vital part of our economy and are going to be a vital part of restarting and building an even more inclusive economy. And transportation, we've had a lot of infrastructure weeks at the White House, but we've never seen that bill we need. And it will be a top priority of House Democrats as we move into the 117th Congress. We put forward the Moving Forward Act and passed it back in June. It is a great blueprint of where we want to go. It is not only an investment in roads and bridges, but in green technology and renewable technology, public transportation, the expansion of broadband internet, really addressing the need to create great jobs, rebuild and upgrade our infrastructure, and use our infrastructure to help tackle the urgent and existential threat of climate change to our economy and certainly to our way of life here in Massachusetts. So transportation is going to be a very high priority as we move forward.
Congressman, we have an interesting follow-up question related to the discussion about childcare. Are you finding it a bipartisan issue, particularly with Republican women Congresswomen, as you deal with the issue?
I guess, and I was thrilled that we had a bipartisan vote on the $50 billion that we passed to stabilize. It is not often that when we have a funding bill that large, that we have such broad bipartisan support. But I founded the preschool caucus in Congress with the late Congressman Richard Hanna, and I'm proud to continue to have Republican co-chair people of that caucus, because I think there is a broad understanding about this issue affects you, whether you're in a red state or a blue state. It is an expense, and more than that, it is a key part of economic development. So this is one of those issues, like the work I've done on addressing the opiate crisis, expanding mental health protections and access, that does have broad bipartisan support. So we're excited. It's given me a chance not to only work with the Boston Chamber of Commerce and my local chambers, but with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, because they too recognize how critical this is going to be to our reopening.
Congresswoman, I know that our Senate President Karen Spilker is a good friend of yours, and I know that you know that she's prioritized issues of mental health and substance abuse up the State House. You served as Vice Chair of Mental Health and Substance Abuse on the committee, and now in Congress you continue to prioritize substance abuse issues. Now it's a bigger concern than ever, mental health. People struggling through the public health crisis, racial crisis. How are lawmakers thinking about prioritizing mental health generally, but also addressing substance abuse disorders?
Yeah, and unfortunately, and thank you for mentioning our Senate president, who is not only a friend, but a constituent, and we're so grateful for her leadership on this issue. And it is going to be absolutely fundamental to how we recover from this pandemic, not only containing this virus, but making sure that we are taking care of the mental health needs of our country. And right now we have 40% of Americans reporting symptoms of, severe mental health issues, whether that's anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. All of these are on the rise. And we are seeing substance use disorder also on the rise. Overdoses are up 18% across the country during this pandemic. And so we have to refocus that addressing public health, addressing this pandemic, what we are going to need to do around equitable access to healthcare. We cannot continue to treat healthcare and mental health as two separate things. They are all part of making sure that we heal our country and our people. And I think one of the bright spots that we have is that in the last 7 months of this pandemic, we have been able to move telehealth forward about a decade in its prevalence and its use. And it's going to be up to Congress to make sure that we have telehealth parity, that we are looking at reimbursement rates to make sure that we are encouraging this use of technology, because it is going to be not only part of how we deliver health in a pandemic, but it is a great way to be able to expand access from everything to mental health and access to therapies, to how we can handle and expand access for cancer patients. So all of this are lessons that we've learned in this pandemic, and we have to look for the innovation and the bright spots that we found and continue to invest in those. So it's got to be a priority as we go forward, and we're very grateful to have such partners on the state level.
Congresswoman, we have a question that seeks your advice. Should Joe Biden win the presidency, what's your advice to him and Speaker Pelosi as to the top 3 priorities going forward?
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sure they'll be calling me for my thoughts.
We'll get to that in just a minute.
But I think that they are they're shared ones, and I'm sure they're not different from any of those that you have. First thing we have to do is address this virus. We have to make sure that we finally have a comprehensive national strategy around testing, tracing, and treatment and vaccine distribution. It's going to be absolutely critical to everything else we do. And related to that, we'll be making sure that we continue to expand, not contract, access to healthcare, and that we are collecting data on access for communities of color and immigrant communities and low income communities, where we have seen the death toll and infection rates so much higher than for white communities and more affluent communities. So we have to do that. And that includes mental health and making sure that we are addressing the very real mental health struggles from people not only facing a deadly pandemic, but as you mentioned, Jim, also this moment of racial justice and and really the trauma for so many people across our country that this has caused. And, we have to take this moment and meet those needs and expand the ACA, expand access to healthcare instead of contract it, as we have this administration still pursuing a lawsuit that will be heard in the Supreme Court on November 10th to undo the ACA and take healthcare away from 23 million Americans. And then we have to look at infrastructure and make sure that we are doing all those things that we need to do to invest in our country, to get jobs going, to get our economy back on track, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And that includes addressing climate change and making sure that we are being the global leaders. We not only have to do this with urgency to save our planet, save our economy, save our agriculture, but we have to do it because we can be the leaders. We are uniquely positioned in Massachusetts to be global leaders in renewable energy. And that it creates also great opportunity, as well as meeting, as the Department of Defense has identified, our #1 national security issue. And finally, our other key priority has to be protecting voting rights and making sure that we continue to fight to have every single person's vote count. And voter suppression is real. Gerrymandering is real. And we have to continue to fight for our democracy and make sure that voting rights are protected, and that we make sure that the ballot is between the voter and their decision without foreign interference or without state interference.
Congresswoman, you mentioned the Supreme Court. There's a question in the queue. Your views on the ongoing process of the appointment, and what, if anything, Congress, the Senate should do going forward with respect to the way this is rolled out.
Yeah, I mean, besides the incredible hypocrisy of holding up Merrick Garland's confirmation hearings and his nomination for a year, and yet rushing through when we are trying to negotiate a relief package, rushing through the nomination of Judge Barrett in the final weeks until an election, when, we have had millions of Americans already cast their ballot. And I think part of that rush is very much about having this hearing on the ACA. So we're going to have to look at the Supreme Court from several different angles. There are the issues and the proposals out there about, is this the time that we look at rebalancing the court? Do we look at term limits for justices? Expanding the number of justices. These are all proposals that we can consider. Some will be up to the Senate alone, some will be broader. But I really think that one of our challenges is going to be, if the ACA is overturned, that we are going to have to address that immediately. We've seen what this administration has offered as its alternative to the ACA. And it is nothing that will help Americans. It is these short-term plans that have low premiums, but they have very low coverage. Not a single one of those plans offers maternity health benefits. We've been talking about mental health and substance use disorder. Almost none of them have ability to cover that and to cover substance use disorder treatment. We will see a return to people with pre-existing conditions, and 7 million more people who have recovered from COVID-19 now have a pre-existing condition. We'll go back to the days where it is very difficult to get coverage at all never mind affordable coverage. So I think the Supreme Court's impact on voting rights, on climate, on reproductive rights, all of these issues, we are also going to have to tackle as Congress on a legislative front while we look at alternatives and options on pursuing the very makeup of the Supreme Court.
Right. I want to close, Congresswoman, just talking about your journey. We started talking about the Melrose School Committee just a short 16 years ago. And, now you're running to become the Assistant Speaker of the House next year. You know this, some of your Democratic colleagues have described you good-naturedly as the silent assassin. Because of your leadership style and your ability to get things done. Talk about the journey. Talk about sort of, lessons learned from the school committee all the way to this current position and what you're looking towards in this potentially new role.
Yeah, well, first, I'm always sort of amused by this silent assassin moniker, which I think really came from one anonymous comment in an article. It is certainly not something I hear called a lot, but I think it's kind of funny to me in some ways because I'm not known for being very silent. So, I think I'm rather outspoken when it comes to these core economic issues for families, for small businesses, for addressing fundamental fairness and equity in our country. And in the application of our laws and our justice system. So I think it would amuse my mother, who has passed away, to ever hear anyone call me silent. But I think that what Melrose School Committee really taught me was, I always sort of describe it at being at the end of the mandate food chain. You have a lot of rules coming down on you and no way to raise revenue. So you just, you get creative. But it really taught me the importance of listening to those you serve. And people are very passionate about their children's schools. I think our school committees right now are doing unbelievable work trying to balance the concerns of parents and educators and superintendents and how we safely reopen our schools. But there's no safe place in your community from parents when you're on a school committee. So whether it's at the deli line, at the market basket, or at your post office, out to dinner, people would stop. And it really did teach me a great lesson about always listening. And those answers and solutions that we're facing now, they are going to come from our communities. And my work and why I'm running for this assistant speaker is to bring those voices of the Commonwealth, of the people in my district, to the leadership table. That's why I ran for Congress. And those were lessons that I really learned on school committee when we were faced with very difficult decisions about closing schools that were extremely hard. And people didn't always agree with our end decision. But if they felt part of the process, if they felt they were being seen and heard, that was as important. And that's a lesson that's really stuck with me. And it's what's driving me for this position. Let's make sure that those voices that I still hear from at the grocery store and around my communities are the ones and the issues that they talk about around their kitchen table are on the table in Congress.
Well, Congresswoman, all of the comments I've read about you reflect the answer you just gave: thoughtful, articulate, and your ability to get things done. I mean, determined, moving obstacles out of the way, understanding sort of the process and how to navigate it. And I think I speak for many in Massachusetts saying we're blessed to have you representing the 5th District in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We look forward to working with you. Thank you for your leadership, especially on issues of childcare and so many other issues, and look forward to continued collaboration with you and your office. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope this was informative for folks, and if you're interested in learning more about the Chamber's programs, bostonchamber.com, you can read a lot more about the work that we're doing, particularly in cooperation with Congresswoman Clark. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jim.